Joining us now is the director of a tremendous new movie called Enys Men. We're talking with Mark Jenkin. And Mark, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Good to hear from you.
This is an eerie and exciting film. Tell us about your inspiration for this, because a lot of this is early on, especially, is a lot of use of silence and sound and atmosphere.
Well, yeah, I mean that comes from the setting really, which is about a sort of uninhabited island just off the coast of Cornwall here, and it was the inspiration behind it really was my starting point was the standing stones of West Penwith, which sounds very specific, but as a kid growing up around here, we were kind of told the Christian version of why there were standing stones in the landscape, which were quite terrifying, and it stayed with me and stayed with the. I think they're in the psyche of a lot of people in my sort of generation who grew up around here. So that was the kind of the starting point really, and making a film that was contained on this island, followed a single protagonist, and looked at routine and the subversion of routine and the horror of that subversion.
You've got a very precise sort of, I think, from my perspective, a precise timing here in how you repeat scenes, and you're setting people up to sort of search the frame and find something, but also you're setting them up in a very unique way because you've got this very strange story unfolding. First of all, for you, your use of sound in creating this, talk about how you came up with that.
Was It's a technical consideration to start with. Sound. I shoot on 16 millimeter on this film on color negative on an old Bolex clockwork camera, which you can't record sound with. You can't record sync sound, and it's very difficult to record any sound because the camera's so noisy. So my starting point always with audio is silence. And I think a lot of the time, if you're working with low budget and not many resources, then quite often when you get to working with sound in post production and in the sound design and the sound mix, you're mending stuff that's gone wrong during the shoot. Whereas if you don't record any location sound, your starting point is a blank canvas really, which I think is a really good creative starting point. And so I add all the sound as I cut the picture, and
Mhm.
I do the sound design, and I do the picture edit, and I do the music all myself, and I do it all concurrently, and I build the whole thing at the same time. And so sound, the cliche when it comes to low budget filmmaking is that sound is 50% of the film. I think well, that's the cliche for all filmmaking, I suppose, but for low budget filmmaking, I think the sound is much more than 50%. And with my type of filmmaking, it really is the major part, the sound design.
Mm. Well, and it's all part of creating this incredible mood. This mood really takes hold of the audience as much as it's taking hold of your main character.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to. I mean, working with Mary, she would quite often ask me for specific questions about motivation for the character, which I'm kind of reluctant to give her too many, because I want that to come from her as she builds the character. And I think for any film that I make, that's often my approach, is that I want the actor to find the character. I think in this film, the character is also trying to find the character. There's a struggle for that character to work out who she is, what she's doing, where she is, what time it is, and how time is moving. I think if it works for people, it works when the audience are kind of going on that journey with that character, trying to unpick the logic of what is happening.
Mm. I was feeling that for sure. Let's talk about your lead character, your lead actress, Mary Woodvine. How did you come to cast her?
Well, Mary's actually my partner in real life.
Oh.
Um, so it was. I mean, that sounds like a simple way of casting somebody, but it was actually quite complicated because I wrote the part for her. Um, I and then I became very worried that it seemed like a very nepotistic thing to do, to write a film for one's partner. So I decided not to cast her in it, and we really tried to reach out to cast somebody else. And then we had a bizarre situation where Mary was almost like the de facto casting director, suggesting peers of hers that might play the role. And I went right around the houses and eventually just sort of thought, actually, I wrote this part for Mary. I cannot imagine the film without Mary in it, and I made the decision to cast her. And I spoke to my agent and Denzel, the producer, and said, look, I think it should be Mary in the film, and they were both in complete agreement and had just been waiting for me to realize that that was the obvious thing to do and the sensible thing to do. So yeah, it was a simple decision made complicated by my worry of how that decision might be perceived.
It turns out to be the right decision. She's got a wonderfully expressive face, and she captures the sort of this almost tedium that is her daily life, but also this growing confusion as she's trying to figure out exactly what's happening, which obviously you built into how she played the character.
Yeah, I loved. I think the performance is staggering. Really, I don't quite understand how she manages to pull it off, because there is this sort of balance of kind of at times bewilderment that is sometimes comic, but also this very calm acceptance at times, and but also does the kind of terror, communicates the terror of that you would feel if time did stop making sense. But I mean, she's brilliant. She's by training, by trade, really a theatre actor, and would ordinarily rely on text and dialogue and physical gesture. And obviously with my film, there's very little dialogue in the film. I don't allow a huge amount of physical gesture. I like the performance to be small. So all of the interior work that she's done on that character can't be expressed through dialogue or through big physical gesture. So it ends up coming out of her eyes and the expressions in her face that are captured in the big close-ups that I favor. So I think it's amazing. I do think it's a really staggering performance, considering how restricted I sort of forced her to be in what she was able to do. And I think it was. I tried to kind of take the pressure off her a little bit
Mm-hmm.
by saying, but by telling her that if the film was a success, if the film worked, then it would be down to her performance, and if the film didn't work, then that would be my responsibility. But I do think her performance carries the film brilliantly.
I couldn't agree more. The film is set in 1973, but the themes could not feel more representative of the time. I mean, considering this was made during the COVID period, and obviously with people isolated at home, that feels incredibly relevant to this story.
Yeah, I mean, it was written it was written a couple of years before the pandemic, but it
Mm.
was certainly influenced by what we'd gone through certainly in the lockdown here in the UK. I mean, you can't make a film in a vacuum. So and the experience had been so full on for the year before we made the film that it couldn't help but influence the film. But I think what it was by chance really that I'd written this film that was about routine and the subversion of routine, and then the lockdown came along, which just put a real focus on how important routine becomes when you're trying to survive in a weird in a sort of alien situation. So during the lockdown, we weren't really allowed to go out. We could go out for an hour a day, and routine became the thing that kept us all sane. And so I think that became more and more prominent in the film as I rewrote it prior to shooting it. It was on everybody's mind when we were filming it. It was certainly on my mind. It would have been on Mary's mind. And then in the edit where I end up rewriting the film a lot in the edit, like most filmmakers do, I think that the experience of the pandemic became very very sort of prominent really within the sort of the day-to-day plotting of what was happening in the film.
It's so unconventional, and the shooting, especially capturing that '70s vibe and that setting. You've picked the perfect spot. I mean, your location spotting is spot on here, but also you've got that old generator. Just looks like it's from 1973. The old radio from 1973. Talk about bringing production design to bear on this.
Yeah, well, I worked with two brilliant production designers, May Voog and Joe Gray. So that's one bit I can take absolutely no credit for, and they are just they've just got a great eye or great eyes, a great team working with them, and it actually, they were dressing sets and locations with stuff that was always designed to kind of be background props, and I would just turn up on the set and think, oh, that looks amazing, and want to get a big close up of it. So that's why we've got a lot of close ups of things that weren't necessarily in the script. I do like a close up of an inanimate object, and a lot of that is to do with this amazing stuff that they were kind of sourcing. But the generator was a funny one, because the generator now, when I look at the film, is such a key part of the film. But we didn't have that generator till the day before we started shooting.
Oh wow.
And actually, Luke, one of the trainees in the art department, or one of the assistants in the art department, actually found that generator at the last minute. We had one that was a lot older and much less time appropriate, which we were resigned to use. And I genuinely think it'd feel like a different film if we'd used that other generator. I think I'm glad you pointed out that the generator, because I think it was a good bit of casting there by the art department.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, I love this film. I was blown away by it. Honestly, I think it's one of my favorites of the year. It's called Enys Men, and just thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Sean. Really appreciate that.